And finally, here's another way to do a camera move with a simulated multiplane look with some depth to it. And this is actually using a tool in TVPaint called the Multiplane camera. And it's similar to the keyframer, but a little bit different. So let me get that open. You go to Add Effects, Motion, Multiplane. And again, we're going to treat these as source layers, so I will turn those off and create a new layer and call it Multiplane Camera Move. And let's stretch it. I'm actually going to make this one a little bit longer than 120 frames. We're going to do 160, so we get a little smoother move on that. Okay, so now with these will be our source layer. This is our layer we're actually rendering the move on. So the first thing you would do is open the wizard. The wizard lets you choose the source layers, either from different clips that you have open or layers from the current clip, which is what we want to use right now. So the multiplane camera move, that's our active layer. We don't choose that. We don't want that selected. So it's these three layers, the overlay, the middle, chair, and the background. Those are our sources. So that brings these up sort of in the default view of how they're set up right now. Let me show you something. I'm going to open the stage, and this is useful for setting up the move. The stage is actually showing you what the camera is seeing. Let me see if I can show you that. In real time, I can move around in this space. Also, if I leave the camera still, if I adjust the planes, you can see they can start in a different place. So if I really wanted to push this foreground stairs up these steps closer, I could actually move the plane so that it is closer. The background could move further away, and the chair, let's keep that where it is. Now if you do this, you see you have to compensate for the fact that the background is not painted larger. Usually when we're setting up a multiplane move, we would compensate for the distance between the planes. So the background layer would be largest, it would fill the screen. The next layer up would be slightly smaller, the next layer up slightly smaller, because we're positioning those planes, the foreground planes and the middle ground, closer to the camera. In this case, I took a flat background and cut it up into planes for the purposes of demonstrating this. So let me show you what I would do with that. I'm going to close the stage for a moment. Go to the source planes, and on the background, and actually adjust the size on that so that it is still further back, but it fills the screen. And I think I'll also push it over just a little bit. So let me show you what that looks like. So it's still in the same place on the in terms of the distance between the planes, but now it's filled up the background. It's not there's no edges of the artwork. There's a little bit here at the top, but we're going to crop that out with the camera. Again, I could move the chair back a little further. I think that's about right. That's where we had it before. So now you can see if I move in, there's some things I have to compensate for, because now it's moving those planes independently of one another where they actually are in real space. If I keep the camera fairly low, that's not a problem. But if the camera goes up high, I'm seeing where these are. So we'll have to compensate for where those are placed, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Right now, I just want to show you the sort of the basic concept of the multiplane. Let me show you some other things you can set up. There's two tabs. The view plane, that's what the camera is seeing, and the planes, and that's the coordinates for each individual plane. If I narrow the view, the field of view, get that down so you can see it. You see what is happening to the camera? I'm seeing less. It's not as wide. So I can also set that up at the beginning of the move. The other thing important to this depth effect is to set the focusing distance. Right now it's by default it's at 1,000 from the camera lens, and that's about where the focus is at the moment. So right now everything is in equally sharp focus. Show you what happens if I move that. I'm going to focus it on the middle plane. So now the focus is set here. If you can see, this went slightly softer because this is further into the foreground. And if I set the depth of field, the depth of field is right here at the focus plane, where the focusing distance is from the camera lens. So this will stay in sharp focus, and everything outside of that cone is going to be slightly less sharp, especially if we increase it. Let me increase it a lot just so you can see the effect. Now if I move in, actually, you know what I need to do is, see, this is where it gets tricky. Got a lot of coordinates to account for. Okay, now you can see it. So this is way too much depth of field, but it shows the effect that you've got the foreground and the background are soft focus, and the middle ground is sharp. Occasionally, you might use this much depth of field. You know, it's depending on the effect you're trying to get. But this is a little over the top here. Let me try to scale it back. Right about there is probably enough, actually. Okay, now we've got just a slightly softer look. So let me set that. Go back here to the end, open the stage again, and we're going to zoom in closer to, let's say we're going to zoom in close down here at the bottom. This is no longer out of focus because it's within that cone. So I need to move the focus plane at the end back over to where it was at the start. So I'm dialing that. You see it moving? I'm going to dial it back until it's right there on the even with the middle plane. So that's going to stay in sharp focus. Let me hide this for a moment. Now you can see what's actually happening. You see how that's gotten a little softer? And I might increase that a little bit more. Okay, so now I've got an effect like if I'm down low, the camera is still down low here. Let's say this is a scene with a little mouse character that runs in and is hiding behind or in between these the chair legs here. So you want to have that feeling of being down low, and you know, if the camera were positioned down here, you would get that kind of depth of field. The background is slightly soft, not as soft as the foreground, but you can see the effect as the camera moves in. It's going to, when it's further back, we don't want it as pronounced. So here at the beginning, go to the end again. Sorry, this is taking a little while. Okay, I'm going to have it 19, about, let's just say even 19. At the end, at the beginning, let's go quite a bit less. Say just about 6. So now when we start, the camera's further out, everything's in relatively sharp focus. As it zooms in, it's getting, pull the timeline out here, you can see that depth of field effect kick in. So again, this is something that you would make these decisions based on the look you're trying to get, and also, you know, how far in the foreground are these steps? You know, how many feet in, you know, away is this chair and the wall behind it? So those are adjustments you can make, but I think you get the idea seeing this. So once you had that set, you would select all of these frames and render the effect stack. Okay, now it's rendered, so I'm going to close the effect stack, and let's look at our camera move. So we're zooming in closer, the little mouse scurries out, and now I'll show you a couple of things here that would need adjustment. The start camera is it's too high because it's showing the cutoff of that. So we're going to go back to the camera tool, and I'm going to actually adjust my camera down a little bit lower. And you can do a camera move within the camera move. I think I discussed that a little bit with the keyframer. This camera can either stay stationary, like this, or I could do a little bit of a additional camera move up. So now this is what we get. Let me play that back. So it's not a huge difference, it's subtle. It's a subtle thing. Now I'll show you just one more. This is from a move that I pre-rendered and planned out already. It's a little bit different than the one I just demoed live. So let's call this one Multiplane 3. Again, these source layers are turned off, and we're on here on the layer we're going to render, and it's set to 160 frames just like the other one. Open this multiplane camera, select those layers in the wizard, and now in my effects bin I've saved my multiplane. So this is already done. Now if you watch it, as I move this in the stage view, you can see the this area right here, the depth of field, the cone on either side of the focus plane, which is the dotted red line. You see that changing as the camera moves in. So towards the end of this, we're getting that, again, that slightly softer look on the foreground and the background wall behind this, which is kept in sharp focus the whole time. So I'll close that. You can see it better here in the project window. See how this is getting softer, this is in sharp focus, and then the background wall is softer. So this move, I went a little bit higher, not down here between the legs of the chair, but up here focused as though something or someone were sitting on the chair. If you watch these numbers change. So I set the keyframe here. The focusing distance was 1,000. The depth of field was only 7. By the end, the last keyframe here, I've changed that focusing distance to 631. The depth of field is 26.7. That could have been just rounded off to 26 or 27. In the stage view, it shows how I arrived at that. It was basically that I was trying to keep the focusing plane always on the chair there. And you can see as the camera zooms in, that depth of field cone gets wider, which means the depth of field is increasing relative to the focus plane, which is right here. Anything, as it gets further out in this cone, further away from the focus plane, the focus gets softer. So then the same thing, you would select all and apply on frames, and then hit apply effect stack to render it. And here is our finished camera move. So this can be useful if you need, more of a depth effect. And you can see here, this camera, the camera view needs to be adjusted. I'm just going to reset that to center, pull that in and down, because again, this is kind of a low camera angle. So we're starting here, and the camera can stay stationary. It can just move in like this, or you can add a second camera, and maybe it shifts up slightly and zooms in. So you get the move within the move, like this. Okay, well, I hope you'll enjoy these tutorials and playing around with this on your own. I will include all of these preset moves that I did in the original source file, and you'll have these source layers to play around with when you do your own move. And then you can see, in principle, how this applies to your own camera move that you might be doing with a character in a background. There is also a lesson in the TVPaint user manual that shows how the multiplane works, and it has a project file and I'll include that as well, so you've got that and you can play around with that. And there's a lot of possibilities. I mean, you can use this multiplane, you can use the keyframer like I showed you, or the for just a simple camera move, use the just the camera tool on a flat plane.